The story I'm about to tell you isn't easy. It's a tale of love, heartbreak, and the kind of wisdom you only gain after life has pushed you to your knees. My mother, God rest her soul, was a woman of many words. She had advice for everything: how to bake the perfect bread, how to deal with nosy neighbors, even how to handle a stubborn goat on market day. But for some reason, she never told me the things that truly mattered. I grew up in a small, vibrant town. Our house was modest but warm, filled with the smells of my mother's cooking and the sound of her voice. She always said, "Ada, life is simple if you follow the rules." And for the most part, I believed her. I was her only daughter, the one she poured all her hopes and dreams into. She taught me how to read, how to cook, and how to pray. But there were lessons she either didn't know how to teach or chose not to. One of those lessons was about men. I was 22 when I met Chike. He was everything my mother warned me about and everything I didn't know I wanted. Tall, confident, with a smile that could disarm even the strictest church deacon. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, like every word you said mattered. When he started coming to the shop where I worked, I noticed him immediately. He wasn't like the other young men in town who were content to sit around and wait for handouts. Chike was ambitious. He talked about opening his own business, about leaving the town and building something bigger. At first, our conversations were casual. He'd stop by to buy a loaf of bread or some yams, and we'd exchange a few words. But then he started lingering, asking about my life, my dreams. Before I knew it, we were meeting after work, taking long walks along the dusty roads as the sun set behind the hills. My mother noticed, of course. She always noticed. One evening, as I helped her shell groundnuts, she looked at me and said, "Be careful, Ada. A man who talks too much is like the wind, he'll carry you away if you're not grounded." I laughed it off, convinced she didn't understand Chike the way I did. She had her old-fashioned ideas about love and marriage, but I was living in a different time. Months passed, and Chike and I grew closer. He was charming, attentive, and full of dreams. But there were cracks I chose to ignore, like how he never talked about his family or how he seemed to know too many women in town. One night, after a community festival, Chike asked me to marry him. It wasn't a grand proposal, no kneeling, no ring, but his eyes held a promise I couldn't resist. I said yes, despite the small voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my mother's. Our wedding was simple, a gathering of friends and family under the big mango tree in our compound. My mother didn't say much that day. She smiled and greeted the guests, but when she hugged me before the ceremony, her grip was tighter than usual. "Remember who you are, Ada," she whispered. I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. Marriage was different. At first, it was exciting. Chike and I moved into a small apartment, and every day felt like an adventure. But slowly, reality crept in. Chike's dreams of starting a business never materialized. He spent more time with his friends than with me, and when he did come home, his temper was short. I tried to talk to my mother about it, but she would always say, "Marriage isn't easy, Ada. You have to be patient." So, I was patient. I cooked, I cleaned, I prayed. But nothing seemed to change. One night, after Chike came home late and smelling of alcohol, I finally confronted him. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice shaking. He laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Don't start, Ada. A man has his own life, you know." That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something my mother had never told me: patience has its limits. The turning point came when I discovered I was pregnant. I thought the news would change everything, that it would bring us closer. But when I told Chike, his reaction was far from what I expected. "Are you sure it's mine?" he asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. The words cut deeper than any knife. I didn't respond. I just stood there, numb, As he walked out the door, my pregnancy was a lonely journey. My mother tried to support me, but there was only so much she could do. One evening, as we sat together peeling cassava, I finally broke down. "Why didn't you tell me, Mama?" I cried. "Why didn't you tell me that love could be like this?" She sighed, her eyes filled with a sadness I'd never seen before. "Because some lessons, Ada, you have to learn for yourself. If I told you, would you have listened?" When my son was born, everything changed. He was tiny, with a tuft of black hair and eyes that seemed to see right through me. I named him Ifeanyi, meaning nothing is impossible. Chike showed up at the hospital, but only for a few minutes. He held Ifeanyi for a moment, then handed him back to me without a word. I knew then that I was on my own. The years that followed were tough. I worked multiple jobs to support Ifeanyi, often going without so he could have what he needed. My mother helped as much as she could, but her health was failing, and I didn't want to burden her. Chike came and went, popping in and out of our lives like a gust of wind. Ifeanyi asked about him sometimes, and I always tried to give a neutral answer. "Your father loves you in his own way," I'd say, even when I wasn't sure it was true. One evening, as I was putting Ifeanyi to bed, he looked up at me with his big, curious eyes and asked, "Mama, why don't you smile like other mothers?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I realized that in my struggle to survive, I had forgotten how to live. That night, I made a decision. I would no longer let Chike or anyone else define my life. I started small, taking time to do things that made me happy. I read books, joined a women's group, and even started writing again, something I hadn't done since my teenage years. Slowly but surely, I began to find myself. Years later, when Ifeanyi was a teenager, Chike showed up again, this time with a new wife and a vague apology. I listened to him, nodded politely, but when he asked if we could start over, I looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, Chike. I've learned to live without you, and I won't go back to the person I was." Now, as I sit here writing this, Ifeanyi is off at university, studying to become a doctor. My mother passed away a few years ago, but her voice still echoes in my mind. I've forgiven her for the lessons she didn't teach me because I've realized something important. The most valuable lessons are the ones we learn ourselves, and if I've learned anything, it's this: patience is a virtue, but self-respect is a necessity. Love is beautiful, but it's not enough on its own. And sometimes, the hardest thing to do is let go of the dreams you thought you wanted to make room for the life you truly deserve. That's my story. I hope it teaches you something my mother never told me. Because if I've learned anything, it's this: life may not come with a manual, but it's never too late to write your own.